Welcome to the BWI Live Show. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Hope you're having a great Wednesday. I said yesterday on the show, July is one of those situations, one of those times of the year where we get a chance to go somewhere, do something, where there isn't as much news, there aren't as many things that we have to be strapped in to cover. Obviously, breaking news happens at any moment of any time, but what I'm saying is Greg's away today. Greg is taking some time to go have a little bit of fun, so he's not on the show today. Normally, we got in a great rhythm of we would do this show together, and then we'd have the wrestling show later today. But he's not here today on this show, and then we'll be postponing the wrestling show for next week. So if you haven't seen that in a little bit, that's why. The Olympics are coming up. There's a whole bunch of things to talk about with wrestling and here on the show today, but he's taken some well-deserved time to go explore the world and see things and, not be staring at a computer screen the entire day. So I'm rolling solo today. And of course, when I am allowed to be off the leash and do whatever I want and have a show to myself, we're obviously going to be getting into film-adjacent conversations. What I really wanted to talk about today was I did a deep dive on the USC offense earlier this week. And I found it super fascinating, but it's kind of hard to do those film things here on the YouTube show without being able to show you. And for copyright purposes, I can't. So what we're doing today is the thing that's more responsible. We're looking at Penn State football. Specifically, before we get to USC and how Penn State might match up and what that offense does, because they're the shiny new toy, shiny new object on the calendar, we're going to be taking a look at what Penn State needs to do during training camp. They have been spending all offseason preparing, training, drilling, getting instruction in so they can hit the ground running in camp. The reason you don't do two-a-days anymore is not just for the health and efficiency of the athlete. You're not trying to get in shape anymore, and you've been installing your stuff since February. So now it's about putting all the puzzle pieces together. And here are 5 puzzle pieces that I think are super interesting. Now, as always, it's me. These aren't going to be, is Drew Aller good? Who are the wide receivers? Is Peter Gonzalez or Tysier Denmark? Those aren't the conversations we're going to be having today. We're going to be diving a little bit off the beaten path, but things that I think are incredibly important for the team's overall health and some of the things that are going to give shape and texture to the offense and defense this fall. So that's what's coming up today. But if you got thoughts, you got comments, you got questions, I'm here for it. As I always say, when I'm here by myself, my co-host is you. You are the star of the show, so if you got some thoughts, I will be putting that up into the chat today. Ryan, back, he says, good morning, folks. Been way too long since I caught a live show. Power is back, and we are ready for an awesome show here in Texas. Let's go T. Frank and the gang. Ryan, I'm happy to have him back because I know he was in the path of Hurricane Beryl last week, so power is back up. He missed the show last week because I don't know if he had power last week, but we didn't have a show last week, so we're back here. The gang is back together. I knew it was going to take a day or two to get everyone back on board. Eggman is here. He's been throwing up just these numbers either in the YouTube comment section or in the live chat. Yesterday, he just said 46. And I was like, 52. What is it? Powerball numbers? I get what you're doing now, Eggman. Appreciate it. You're getting everyone excited for Penn State football. And if you don't know what he's doing, I'll let you figure it out on your own because it was a bit satisfying for me, so I'm not going to give it away. David Greeter here. He says, Drew Aller, 40 touchdown season inbound, T. Frank. You know, it's possible. I will never say never in all of these situations. I think some of the things we're going to get into today may say that he throws 30 touchdowns, but how many of those are explosive play touchdowns? You know, the quality versus the quantity, all those things are on the table. One thing I know is that he's very good at reading a defense in the red zone. He's really good at executing in the red zone. So if they get down close, they're going to have an opportunity to throw some of those touchdowns. Corey Smith, she says, good morning. We're here for you, T. Frank. Going to be a great show. Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate the positivity. I got to tell you, Corey, we're not going to get into psychology here, but I appreciate positivity on the internet more than ever. If you haven't noticed, it's not necessarily the friendliest place at all times. So I'm glad for the roll call here. I'm glad we got the regulars on the show, and we got people that are excited for what's going on. Before we get into today's main topic, we had another question from the BWI Mailbag yesterday that I really liked, but we didn't have time for it. We had a really full show with Nate and with the whiteout and all those discussions, so I want to get to that right now. So our question actually comes from Davidwg. One of the reasons we didn't get to the show yesterday is because he had another question that I wanted to answer. And I always feel bad when somebody has two really good questions. I struggle with, do you get two bites at the apple when we only have 4 or 5 spots? So I wanted to get to this question today. Might even write about this a little more in depth at bluewhiteillustrated.com. And if, by the way, you want to have an impromptu mailbag session here, you can ask a question in the chat. He says, if Penn State has 2 wide receivers that play to the level of Parker Washington, is that enough for the offense to be able to compete for a Big Ten title? This is a great question because I think there's nuance to the threshold here. It's not just if Penn State has good wide receiver play or elite wide receiver play, can they compete for a Big Ten title? Parker Washington, to me, evokes a very specific thing, a very specific threshold of play. So, David, here's my thought on that. Penn State did have 2 players that played to Parker Washington's level of consistency and ability when they had Mitchell Tinsley and Parker Washington on the team, 2022. They didn't compete for a Big Ten title. I mean, they did, technically. They went 10-2 like every other year, but they didn't get to the Big Ten title. So my first answer is no. No, they would need something more than that in order to create a threat in the offense. And this is why we talk about speed and why we talk about big play potential in an offense. This gets into the tactics of how a defense reacts to you and adjusts to what you're doing offensively. Speed is the number one commodity in football, because if you can threaten a defense for a touchdown from a wide receiver on the outside of the formation, or generally on the perimeters of the defense, you force them to play certain coverages. They have to do certain things. You can't just play 3 deep defenders, whether it's cover 3, or if you want to play cover 1, where you have 1 deep defender and then everyone's playing man coverage. Speed forces you to play zone or play off, which creates space for guys like Parker Washington. Now, Parker Washington wasn't slow, and I do think injuries were a big part of the fact that he wasn't necessarily the same guy that he was as a freshman, that he was as junior. I think he's fast enough. I really liked the way he played football. But the final iteration of what Parker Washington was, he's a very good football player. He had enough speed to break tackles and get explosive plays, but he wasn't the kind of player that threatened the defense deep. The person that did that in the offense was Theo Johnson, a tight end, who doesn't run a 4-3, who doesn't run a 4-4-0. You know, he's a 4-5's athlete as a 6'6" tight end. That combination is special. So special that when he was a draft pick with minimal production his senior season, or his final season, he went in the 4th round, which he is now in line to start for the New York Giants. He's replacing Darren Waller, a borderline Hall of Fame player. So that's the talent level Theo Johnson had, but it is still not that receiver threat because it's in the middle of the defense, which can attack certain parts of the coverage, but it is just not quite the same. So my next question to that question is, what about Andy Kotelnicki? Because in Mike Yurcich's offense, it was not enough for all of those pieces to work together to create the offensive ability to generate the level of attack necessary to put it to go to head-to-head with the Ohio States and Michigans. Does Andy Kotelnicki know how to get a guy like Parker Washington open for more explosive plays down the field? Does Andy Kotelnicki lower the threshold for what you need? Because that informs the conversation today about the receivers. Do they need somebody that has all of those things as a receiver? Brad Moeller says Wallace equals the guy. Yes, I think he has enough speed. And that's the conversation, too, about football. We do glorify, sometimes to the detriment of good player skills, speed because of what it can do for your offense. But if you don't have the other skills to catch the football, get open, know where you're supposed to be, play with consistency, then speed, like size or strength, without enough of the other ingredients in the pie, it means nothing. So Trey Wallace is fast enough. He is big enough. He's explosive enough. When he is healthy, he can be that guy for this offense. Now, there are other players that need to hit. So that's something that we'll talk about too on the show today. Brad also says like and subscribe. I agree. Thank you, Brad. Thank you for the like and subscribe. But I also want to go one step further. If you like this video, you're going to love what's at BWIillustrated.com, where you can go and see that conversation about the USC offense, because there I have no problem showing you a YouTube video, breaking down individual plays all the way through a game and showing you what I see on the film. And that's something that I've started to do, something I think is really fun. Subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com right now for 2 months for $1, code PSU1. You'll get into the game film breakdown, where I go into the coach's film and I say, here's what happened in the Penn State game as my interpretation of what Penn State called, why they called it, how it worked out, or why it didn't work out. I do that for every single football game on the message board, where we break down those plays and give you the why behind what you saw. It happens every Sunday on the Blue White Illustrated message board. You'll get that for $1. Subscribe right now and you can get all that stuff. I'm getting warmed up. I'm getting, my shoulders loose. I'm getting my fingers loose, which I'm going to get carpal tunnel from the football season, because that always happens. But you get all that information for $1 at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. And we're starting now, taking a look at the USC offense and what makes it special or not. Because that's the thing. We know about Lincoln Riley because the people here in this show, whether you're watching or you're on camera, we love college football. We love football. So you've heard of Lincoln Riley. But what is it about him that makes him an offensive genius? You know how everyone throws around the word genius? Well, there is some interesting stuff that he does in his offense, but is it all unique? Is it all singular? Is he this offensive mastermind, or did he find a couple good wrinkles and then he does a lot of things that everybody else does? Find out. All right, so let's get into our 5 burning questions that T. Frank has for Penn State training camp.
Number 5.
Okay, so number 5 here is the receiver room. I said we're not going to be going into who's the starting receiver, but the receivers are important. And this is a depth chart question. One of the things I love, there's so many reasons I love football. First off, it is the perfect blend of athletic prowess and mental acuity. You have to be smart to play football. You can't just be a caveman or overly violent. You have to know what you're doing. It's tactical. It's also a puzzle. Roster construction. I grew up playing Madden. I'm going to admit this on air. I never played NCAA football. I played Madden because when I was a kid, I was some weirdo that thought you had to choose, only dogs, not cats. I play Madden, not NCAA. Are you kidding me? Anyway, I love roster construction. I always wanted to be a GM when I was growing up. So these intricacies, the more I've learned about football, and the thing I love thinking about is how do the puzzle pieces fit together to get you a winning picture? At receiver, you need good football players. We talked about the traits necessary to be explosive and to have a threat index on your offense that spans the board, that creates the spatial distortion Andy Kolnicki talks about. You can't just do that through scheme. You actually have to have viable threats outside, in the slot, in the middle of your offense, in order to force the defense to make hard choices. But how do those players work together? I think it's super interesting. Talked about Trey Wallace already. He and Julian Fleming kind of fit the same position. I'm going to speak in general terms, and it's not 100% true all the way. These are just the things I've seen from college football over the years and how I understand these concepts. The Z receiver is the receiver to the field. They are a route runner. They are a guy that works well in space, has some deep threat ability, but primarily is a guy that's going to catch the football and make plays for your offense. Fleming and Wallace are both that guy. Now, the wrinkle here is Trey Wallace was also the team's X receiver last year. But if you're trying to feature him in the offense, what's the most efficient way to get him the football? It would be, from what I've seen, to put him at that position where you funnel most of your targets. Now, Andy Kotelnicki does two things really well. Ignores that and throws the football and gets players open at whatever position he wants to. But there is the general, where are you starting position? If we have to build a depth chart and we can't put Trey Wallace at two different positions because he physically can't be in two places at once, which would you prefer to have him at? Same thing with Julian Fleming. The X receiver in college football generally is a guy in Penn State's offense. Traditionally, if you look at where they started, a guy like Keandre Lambert-Smith, Trey Wallace, these are Malik McClain, big, fast, athletic players that can stretch the defense, and in one-on-one situations where you're skewing the coverage to the long side of the field because you need to cover green grass, you get more one-on-one opportunities on the X receiver side, which is typically the short side of the field, the boundary. That guy needs to be explosive. He needs to be a big play threat, and he might not get the football all the time, but he can generate big plays. Then the question becomes, looking at those two players, how do they fit together? What about Liam Clifford? Where does he play? I thought it was very interesting the way they split up the white team and the blue team during the blue-white game. Liam Clifford was on the white team offense, but after Trey Wallace's day was done, he started playing a little bit outside. Is he a three-position player? Is he going to be the guy that is the glue guy, fix it all, I'll play X, I'll play H, I'll play Z, put him anywhere and he can run routes? Because that's his skill. He is a good route runner. He's fast enough to play all of those positions. I think he can play with more physicality. That's the part I think he needs to do a little bit better. But he didn't look bad running from the X position. And he didn't look bad running from the Z position. So does that give the flexibility to get Caden Saunders onto the field? Can you see like how the pieces need to fit together? Okay, so Caden maybe is best here. Wallace is maybe best here. So then who's going to play this other position? And what are the things you need to have on the field? We talked about speed. So Amari Evans. Nate talked about how important Amari Evans is to the offense because he is the guy that can threaten the defense deep. Where he has that speed threat that you have to account for, he needs to make good on it. And Penn State needs that in the offense. He's not a fast enough guy. He's a fast guy. So he has to play a position. With the way Andy Kotelnicki motions players in and out of formations and changes the formation from bunched, like there are some times I saw in film where he had all five eligible receivers on one side of the field. So some of these questions and some of these conversations are just like, it doesn't matter in those situations, but you can't make a meal out of side dishes. You have to have some meat and potatoes. You have to have a protein. You can't just make a meal out of all arugula salads. And I'm stretching this here. I apologize. But you get what I'm saying. You need to have some staples in your offense. And most teams run out of base formations, base personnel packages, and a three-receiver package that works well together, presents those multiple threats, is essential for this offense to function the way that everyone wants them. It's not just who's good, it's how do they fit together to get the optimal situation. Now, that's the optimal situation. That is not what do we have to do, because at a certain point, you just have to do something in order to get your offense to function at some level, which can be good enough. Doesn't have to be perfect. Gonna jump in here in the chat. We got some comments here. Liam McConkey, Clifford is definitely underrated. Yeah, I don't know if he's Lad. First off, I get what you're saying, but Lad McConkey was fast. I think he ran in the 4.4s. I don't know if Liam runs in the low 4.4s and is as explosive, but I get what you're saying. Yeah, put him in a certain situation, let him play, an underrated football player on the team. I think from what he showed last year, there was an opportunity for him to do things in the offense, but Certain players got the football, certain players got targets, and other players didn't. Wobble Wobble says, I have one burning question and one question only. When is Nick Singleton dropping a video of him breaking Saquon's weight room record on the power clean? Yeah, that's a great question. Can he do it? It would be at some point this year. Chuck Losey said that this 6-week period, and he mentioned this starting in June at Lift for Life, is one of the most important for the team to get ready for the season. So if it happens, I think it might be happening soon. We'll see. I don't know. Ryan says, I contend that at least you have elite speed, at least 3 spots on the field, one being the backfield. You can't compete for titles. You know, Ryan, this reminds me of the pass rusher conundrum. You can have one elite pass rusher, and a team can negate that guy with scheme and double teams. But you see the best defenses have at least 2, if not a third, that is competent, maybe not at the level of the other 2, that can take advantage of those one-on-one situations and win and create no-win situations for the offense. I think you're right. Receiver or offense, you need to have speed, a level of threat credibility at 3. I mean, that would be ideal, right? You want 5. You want no. I'm sorry. You want 11 from the quarterback to the offensive lineman. You want your offensive lineman to be fast and explosive. And that's something else that we've talked a lot about in the recruiting conversation about receivers and speed, and everyone's pushing back on, well, Penn State had fast receivers last year and they were bad on offense. That is true. There's also different types of speed. There's being fast, and I don't want to just, a shortcut might be a track athlete where you have your hips turn really fast, right? But you're really light on the ground, like pat, 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 pat. Then there is explosive football speed where you push so hard into the ground with your feet and with your explosive movement skills that you generate force through barriers. And those barriers are defenders or blockers or whatever. Explosive athletes, that is the number one thing I look for in football at every single position, because being fast isn't good enough. You need to have the combination of size, speed, and athleticism to be the best at your position in some form or fashion. And that, I think, is a perfect place to wrap up the conversation about receivers and fit together, because they've got fast receivers. But Trey Wallace is the one guy that's explosive fast, where he's violent in his speed, to the point that sometimes he gets hurt. So let's get on to number 4.
Number 4.
Okay, so we had a conversation several times about, is this going to be a 2 tight end offense or is this going to be a 3 receiver offense? And the answer is it's going to be both. Penn State's going to use both. And then the percentages, obviously, from there are important. I still think you need to be a spread team, a 3 receiver team, to present those threats that we just talked about of spreading the field and not gumming up the middle of the offense with 2 tight ends, unless you can do that by creating threats from the tight end position out wide in a real way. But let's go beyond that here for a second. When you look at Andy Kotelnicki's offense, there is a diverse, robust, and inclusive sub-package culture where it's not just you're going to run 2 tight ends, you're just going to run 3 receivers. You're going to run a bunch of different formations and player packages. Some of them are in specific situations, and some of them are going to be for specific plays or ideas. So beyond just the starters, is it going to be a 3 tight end focus? We talk a lot about, is Khalil Dinkins or Andrew Rappelier? Why not both? Khalil Dinkins moves like a receiver. Last year during the bowl game, the whole conversation we had about the X receiver, they put Dinkins at X. That's what they did. So, they see him, at least somebody in the building sees him as a guy who can play receiver in a certain light. So do you have a 3 tight end set, kind of in the vein of the T formation, that suddenly you explode out of that and you've got Katron Allen in the slot, you've got Khalil Dinkins out wide, and now you can run screens, you can run goes, you can do a bunch of things, again, that threaten the defense in multiple ways. Or what about a 3 running back package? Quentin Martin, is he going to fight for some of those snaps? Because here's the thing, you can't do all of it all the time. That's what causes problems when it comes to the defense or the offense of the depth chart, or the defense of the depth chart is some guys aren't going to play as much, and they might be deserving of playing time, but they're not as good as somebody else at their position. And beyond the top two of receiver, tight end, 1, 2, and 3, 3 and 4, and even the fourth wide receiver. Why can't you have Liam Clifford, Caden Saunders, Julian Fleming, and Trey Wallace all on the field at the same time? Why can't you have Amari Evans in there? Why can't you go 10 personnel is what that's called, with 4 receivers and 1 running back? You can. You absolutely can do that. But which one of these players is going to create the sub-package culture for Penn State this year? Because Andy Kotelnicki will play the best one, and he will generate an offense that is dictated by the talent on the field. Let's talk about what Rob Sherrill has to say here, because I'm glad you brought this up. He says, speed is not what I think of when I think of Michigan last year. They regularly beat teams that were faster. That is not necessarily true. To me, the biggest difference between the Michigan team last year and the year before is a consistently healthy Roman Wilson and J.J. McCarthy being a part of the run game when necessary. Those back-breaking runs from J.J. McCarthy, he's a fast quarterback. When you have Donovan Edwards, who is an elite speed back, he's out there on the field. Now, did he break a lot of explosive plays last year? Not as much as he did the year before, but speed was absolutely an element in that Michigan offense that caused them to be unstoppable because they had the credible threat of the run game up the middle. They had a good offensive line. They could control the middle of the field. And suddenly you got Roman Wilson on orbit motions where you've got to dedicate 6, 7 players to the box. Maybe you're dropping a safety, it's 8. And you've got a one-on-one with a guy who runs a 4-3. And now maybe that's a safety. You know, in Penn State's situation, maybe it was Jalen Reed. Jalen Reed's a good football player. He's not a 4-3 athlete. Creating those situations where you got everything bottled up and suddenly J.J. McCarthy pulls it and he's running in the open field. Michigan previously was a ground and pound team in the traditional manly way. They made a big change to incorporate modern concepts, modern schemes when it comes to generating explosive plays. They used motion like the Miami Dolphins with Tyreek Hill. They used that cheetah motion or whatever, the explosive speed motion, whatever, when you're running full speed into a different formation at the snap. That's using speed to your advantage. That's using speed to generate problems for the defense. So, yeah, on the whole, they ran 2 tight ends, whatever, but speed was absolutely an element of what they did on offense and how they generated explosive plays over the middle of the field with a guy like Roman Wilson when everyone's playing the run, and now you have somebody to throw to over top. And Penn State needs to generate those threats. They need to do the exact same thing somehow, some way on offense, and they need to find those players that do that. The thing I've said, Nick Singleton is explosively fast, but tight ends generally are not as fast as the fastest wide receiver. And do you have the guys to create that balance on offense, or are you gumming up the middle of the field with a bunch of tight ends and a bunch of running backs, and are you not actually creating a balanced threat package? I'm saying a bunch of the same things, but it all comes down to, can you force the defense into making tough choices? And last year, Penn State's offense did not do that. The defense could dictate to the offense by knowing what was coming. Penn State was going to run the football, probably on the first play of the drive and probably on first down. And then from there, we all saw what happened in that. So let's get on to the next thing in our conversation about things I want to know about during training camp that I think are really important for Penn State's health next year. Might be pertinent here.
Number 3.
All right. So we know, and we talked about this yesterday. So this is a little bit of a rehash of yesterday, but I think it's really important. Left tackle depth. Drew Shelton is going to be the starter, is how we all are viewing this. I asked James Franklin this summer he was talking about Drew Shelton. Somebody asked about Drew Shelton and how he's progressing and some of those things. And I asked, how do you define starter? Because he said in the past, we view him as a starter, but he was a guy that was a 6th offensive lineman that didn't start last year. And his conversation was somebody who has played for us to a winning level that we feel like if they play, we can win. So that makes sense. Yeah, Drew Shelton has been a guy that has played and has played to a level that they can win. Do they have a Drew Shelton behind Drew Shelton this year? That's a big question because tackle depth has been a problem for Penn State year after year after year. I'm actually pretty optimistic about where they are generally on the talent spectrum, even if in 2025 right now they don't have necessarily the same recruiting success that they've had at that position in previous years. But here are the guys at left tackle specifically. Let's just assume that Anthony Donko and Nolan Rutria, both right tackles, they're not in this conversation. Those guys are going to play on that side. They're going to solidify the depth over there, and I think you should feel pretty good about that. Now, each player has some questions, just because that's how football works. Neither of them are 13-game starter proven level players. But on the left side, how's JB Nelson? I mean, I don't remember the last time I've seen him play consistently on the football field. I know he's talented. I know he's a guy that I saw that played left tackle and looked good despite some weight issues and athleticism issues at Lackawanna because of things we've already talked about. He reshaped his body. He plays guard. He's Penn State's swing tackle for that left position. Then he didn't play in the spring. He didn't play last year. So when it comes to the depth of the offense, we've talked about this offensive line having a lot of depth and versatility, but when you start cutting out certain parts of it, do you still have that depth, especially key players that are legitimate swing players that can play 3 positions? And if not, is Javen Williams ready? Again, Franklin talked about Javen Williams this summer and said he's earned the right to be in the conversation. He also didn't have to battle anyone for that because both JB Nelson and Drew Shelton weren't playing in the spring. So I'm not saying James Franklin is lying about that. I'm saying that the picture presented was that Javen Williams had to play and impressed James Franklin enough to say that. If those other players are back in the conversation full time, is that still the truth? So this training camp, is that the case? And that's something that I don't know. I'm sure there's more nuance and context to that. But at this point, that's what I want to know about the left tackle position because Drew Shelton is not a given. I don't want to rehash that. We talked about that yesterday. I think he's got good talent. He's a guy that can play the position for sure. He has been preparing for this for 3 years, but preparing for it and then doing it that's always the leap. Right? So these guys behind him, injuries happen. He got hurt last year. They need to find out what the left tackle depth is, not what it presented itself to be earlier, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a nuanced conversation about depth because you like their depth. I like the talent that they have going even down the list of Egan Boyer and Garrett Sexton, who are not going to be a part of this conversation. Long term, I like the bodies and the talent at the position, but there is a difference between that potential and productivity playing right now. And I think that is still a gap that needs to be bridged during training camp. Okay, getting into number 2 now here on our list.
Number 2.
Number 2. We just talked about some of the problems. Let's talk about a good problem to have. Penn State's third down defense. What's it going to look like this year? Regardless of your defensive coordinator, regardless of the scheme you're playing, third down is your opportunity to be creative and aggressive on defense. So Tom Allen likes to play dime defense. So you have your nickel, who is a safety in this defense. Now, they've talked about how this is still a 4-3 defense, and they base out of that, but that's also just kind of saying, like, structurally, we have 4 down defensive linemen, and there are 3 players that play in the underneath coverages at a linebacker position. But the body types and some of the responsibilities and coverage for that lion position are closer, or at least a more even split between secondary player and linebacker. Then when you get to third down, that guy can rove around the defense, or one of those safeties can be kind of a free-floating player. Then you bring in a true corner for that nickel position. When you've got those 6 defensive backs on the field, you call that dime defense. So nickel, dime, you get how football works, right? But at the same time, you've got to take players out of the front 7 in order to accommodate a player on the back end. So which one of the players up front do you want to take off of the field? Granted, one of them is going to be your heaviest defensive tackle, your run-stuffiest defensive tackle. Zane Durant needs to be on the field. It feels like that's a strong gotta have him on the field. You have 3, if not 4 defensive ends that you can play. Jameel Lyons has people's eyes wide as saucers. Everyone's in love with Abdul Carter. Denai Dennis-Sutton is a really good football player who's earned that right. And Amin Vanover is a really good football player who's earned that right. So there's 4 there. We got 5 defensive linemen. We've got 6 defensive backs. Are they going to play a linebacker at all? Tony Rojas needs to be on the field. You've got to fight for these positions on third down. It's almost like an entirely new defense. So what's it going to be? How are you gonna slice this cake? I'm always fascinated by this. We saw Manny Diaz take one approach. We saw him augment that approach over time, from when he had Jair Brown to then when he wanted to run 4 defensive ends, and then people started running on him on third down and 20 and almost getting a first down and then converting some of those. So they went back to just a base defense. What's the combination this year? They start that in camp. You lay the groundwork of what you want to be for the first month of the season at the very least, but really the core of your identity. When we need to get a stop, we do this. And you start practicing that in, you start experimenting with it in the spring, and then you really hammer in and hone in on what you want to be during training camp. So that's going to be something they figure out. A part of this conversation is the Abdul Carter conversation we had yesterday. And I kind of left off with this thought because I didn't have enough time to get into the nuance of it. But here's what I'm thinking after 24 hours of kind of mulling on it. Base downs are different, as we mentioned, and Abdul Carter's going to play with his hand in the dirt as a defensive end on base downs. Whether he's the starter or not, I don't know. Whether or not he beats out other guys for that position. But on third down, there's nothing that says that he has to play outside. He doesn't have to rush off the edge. He can rush off the edge sometimes, or he can go back to doing what he did, which is being a total havoc player, where he's rushing over the A-gap, and you're designing the defense to get him against a running back. You could do that with Jameel Lyons, but Abdul Carter, that linebacker-like movement skills, the ability to win and dominate in space and dominate smaller opponents because he's got the size and the strength. You don't want to just get rid of that. In my mind, because, again, like I said, I only played Madden. I didn't play NCAA, so I have to fight this binary idea in my mind where now he's only a defensive end. No, he can play safety if you wanted him to. Like, that's the whole point of defense, is you can play those players at literally any position. The results of that, that's on you as the defense coordinator. So we'll see how third down defense goes, where Abdul Carter plays, how they use the front 7, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the top 4 reasons, 4 of the top 5 reasons, the things that I'm looking for in camp. So just a quick review. Here we are, number 5. How will the receiver room shake out positionally? How will the talents meld together? The sub-package culture on offense. Wide receiver 4, running back 3, tight end 3. Who sees the field more in those specialty packages that we all latch on to? What's the T formation for 2024? And which players make that go? Number 3, left tackle depth. Beyond the starter, you need to have the next guy. Either that just to prepare for the future, or as a contingency, do they have a guy that they view as a starter behind Drew Shelton? And then number 2, the third down defense. What is the makeup and the nature of it this year? Which players are put in a position to shine, and how does that all meld together? So we're coming up here to number 1. If you've got any thoughts, any comments, any rebuttals to all this stuff, obviously I'm up here monologuing and I can't read and talk at the same time. You've seen me do that before. It goes how it goes. So throw your comments in the chat. We'll get to that after number 1.
Number 1.
Here's the whole thing. So we did the hyper-specific, let's fiddle around with running back 3 and the left tackle depth and third down defense. And here's the major question. The number one thing that they've been working for all year. Did the plan work? Did Penn State's streamlining of verbiage this year pay off? The overarching thing we've talked about starting in February and going through training camp and this summer, that we're going to just review this because there was some conversation recently that I think not everyone is still on the same page about what's happening on offense specifically, and then what their plan was on defense. Here it is. Football is spoken in codes. So you want to line up in a certain formation, you call that formation tiger or pink umbrella or drywall. Well, Penn State has called it banana for the last 3 years under Mike Yurcich. So guess what? We're just calling a 3-receiver formation with a tight end in a traditional H-back position. We're just calling that banana. Doesn't matter what Andy Kolnicki called it before. You are running a certain stunt that everybody runs, where you're going to have a defensive tackle looping around to the outside and a defensive end crashing into the B gap. You might call that swipe. Well, guess what? They called it flip. We're calling it flip. And that's James Franklin's whole point. I'm not even going to call this a gamble. I'm going to call this insight into how do we make this easier for the players so that we skip the step of, because that's half of football. If you can eliminate the, what am I doing? And you just play football, you execute your assignment with confidence and conviction, you're suddenly a much faster football player. Kobe King is roughly the same speed as Tyler Elsdon. And I know I say that and you go, how dare you? It's kind of true. Kobe King started playing with better anticipation and his other skills started to show up. He's a little more agile. He's a little longer. He's bigger. He's got more traits that make him a positive Mike linebacker. And again, I'm not dumping on Tyler Elsdon. This is the difference and why Kobe King played so well and took so many snaps last year to be the full-time starter. You need to get everyone to do that. Offense, defense, and special teams. Because you installed 3 new schemes. So make them as much like the old ones as possible in ways that don't matter. In ways of, we called it this. So Penn State's offensive schemes, Andy Kolnicki and Mike Yurcich, have overlap. And really, to quote James Franklin, everyone's kind of running the same things. Going back to our conversation when I was rambling about Lincoln Riley, he does a lot of the same stuff that literally everybody else does. He's got a couple of things that make him unique, but he does pretty much what everybody else does. Everyone runs option plays. Everyone runs certain pass concepts, and there are only so many ways to run the football. You've got some traditional, this is how we run the football, and most people don't use the offensive oddities because over time, certain things work more, so you lean into those. Here's an example. Once again, everyone runs inside zone. Everyone runs this particular zone concept with the offensive line. It pairs really well, like wine and cheese, with the option play, and more recently, the RPO. What are you calling your inside zone? Are you calling it Rambo? Why are you calling it Rambo? Does it need to be called Rambo? So the coaches had to unlearn what they had been doing for 10 years maybe. And they had to be one person adapted instead of, well, I should say 3 people adapted of Andy Kolnicki, Tom Allen, and Justin Lustig. Those 3 people adapted instead of 127. So James Franklin, I think, made a wise, insightful decision of, here's what we've done in the past. It hasn't worked because of all these things we've learned. So we're going to do that differently. And all of that was in anticipation of July 31st through August 31st, when they can install everything and they can skip the part of the defense for all of the starters. Freshmen are still going to do that because they're learning what the basics are at times of, hey, what is inside zone? Maybe I didn't run that in high school. What is, how do I fill this gap if X happens? If I'm a defensive player, say I'm a linebacker. That's what you're learning. You're learning what you're going to be in training camp. And the best way to learn is to execute properly. To execute properly, you need to know what you're doing. That is, to me, like that's the number one thing coaches are doing, is just getting everyone on the same page to do everything in unison and then letting their talent of the player take over. Because kind of like effort, that's what you can control. They've been pre-selected for their talent. That variable, in a certain aspect, it doesn't matter because Penn State recruits well. They recruit players that can win football games. Now, do they come up against better players in other situations? And sometimes, do you just lose to a better football player? Yes. But you can't think like that if you're a football player. You got to believe I'm good enough to win and then know how to do it. And if you get enough players doing that and playing on the same, that's when you become a good football team. So I applaud the decision to do that, but it matters now. From February, when they were doing all of this stuff and installing these things in March and getting those voiceovers to the players for them to learn, all of that effort is paying off starting in August, July 31st. So that's the number one thing. Did the plan work? Did James Franklin's strategy this year of how to hit the ground running and not have a year of making sure, like that adjustment year we saw in 2016 to Joe Moorhead's offense, learning from those mistakes. So we'll see how that goes. Sean says, I know it's a game, but on NCAA, the Penn State offensive line sucks in the pass game. Yeah. I haven't played it yet. You would have known if I had played it yet, but that's interesting because they lost a lot of pieces. I mean, they lost two really good offensive tackles, and there's one of those things where you get a reputation for one thing last year not going their way in terms of like there was one kind of like cheat code for defenses to do. Like if you just do this, and this, you get a free rusher going through the A gap in that scheme. So they might be better than that. They might not be. I actually don't know. All right. I don't know why I'm doing this, but Charisse, who's an Ohio State fan, who is here in the chat all the time, I'm not trying to feed the trolls, but at the same time, she's got this provocative question. Here's a question. Will Penn State be able to break out of Michigan and Ohio State's shadow and win the Big Ten this year? Charisse, we're going to find out in September. But they don't play Michigan this year, so who knows? We'll all find out together. David K says, could somebody please explain to me why Nate Bauer is not here? It's his day off. Nate does the Tuesday show. This is my job to do the YouTube channel, and I love having Nate on the show, but everyone deserves to not be working 24/7 all the day, all the time. His job is to get those interesting nuances and insights from the front office, basketball, football, etc. So he's doing that today. So if you want to know specifically, he's focusing on that. I'm here talking to you. Steve, he says, it's clear we can't recruit top wide receiver prospects, so Penn State needs to attack the transfer portal for wide receiver talent. Steve, you need to do both. Both have to happen. Both cost a lot of money. Money that right now Penn State is allocating in different places, and they don't have the resources to do both. And they maybe don't, from a philosophical perspective, want to do both. Because speed is expensive. Not only is speed important, I gave you like a diatribe on why speed is important tactically in football. Knowing that wide receivers that are good cost more money than Penn State wants to spend or can spend. I don't know the details of it, but that's part of it. So you say go into the portal, it's not like going to the grocery store. It kind of is like going to the grocery store, but it's like, are you getting the smoked salmon or are you going to be getting frozen tilapia? I keep going to food. I don't know food that well, but you know what I'm saying. Like you can't always buy what you want because cost is a factor. And now that the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness are all a thing, that's a huge part of recruiting. So is it that Penn State can't get a receiver, or is it that the way that they've been trying to get a receiver, their normal ways are not working and they need to change the plan or have some sort of thing in the environment change around them? That's important. So there we go. We hit on just about everything, I think. I think we hit on everything in the universe. This has been a good show. Appreciate everyone in the chat. We've got some really good conversation and insight that we got on the show today. I really appreciate you being here. We got a good show. As always, please subscribe to Blue White Illustrated here on the YouTube channel. Sorry, I'm saying the same thing over. I'm vamping because I'm trying to read Josh's comment here. He says he wants to talk about the whiteout game. He's from Gatesburg, Illinois. Love the Washington pick for the Penn State football whiteout game since it's the integration of West Coast talent. I agree. I think that there is a certain aspect of newness to the whiteout game now. Maybe reinvigorates it a little bit. You might have a good chance of beating an interesting opponent and bringing in something that provides a little newness, like you said. We'll see. Because at that point in the season, November 9th, we have no idea what their record is going to be. They play Ohio State the week before. Does that cut the knees out of the excitement for the game? I don't know. I guess we'll find out when we all get there. So that's it. I think I've exhausted the chat. You guys are tired of me talking just monologuing here on the show, and I think we covered everything we needed to. So we'll be back tomorrow with a recruiting show. Ryan Snyder is going to be here. Fitz is off for the week, so he and I are going to be talking about, in detail, those things that Steve was talking about in the chat. Penn State is not able to get wide receivers because Lex Cyrus and Taz Williams went elsewhere last week. It's been a while. It's been a full week since Lex Cyrus picked South Carolina. We're officially going to talk about that on the show tomorrow. So if you're looking for your pound of flesh, if you want to yell and rant about Penn State wide receiver recruiting, we're talking about it tomorrow. Also things other than that, but I don't know what that is yet because I just got done with this show and it took me all day to think about what I wanted to talk about here. So we'll be back with fresh, interesting things because that's what we do here on the BWI Live Show. We'll talk to you then.